I think it's clear that Europe have a kind of identity crisis. I wouldn't say that Europe really have a crisis. I think that there is a very robust tradition of trust and trade, I call it. There's a culture for exchange, and there's a very robust infrastructure around this. The sad thing is, it's so boring, right? People are not gonna identify with each other based on a trade contract or a trade deal or something. In the interest of trying not to kind of monopolize or colonize culture, the emotional narrative or the identification mechanistic was left out of the European protocol. Education, the general knowledge machinery was left in the hands of the locals. And I wouldn't say it's gone terribly wrong. It just means that there is no agenda, there's no protocol, there's no way of creating a stronger interdependence within Europe, which has a greater sense of emotional things. And of course, the big question is whether this should be like that, because we obviously don't want a top-down definition of how to organize the civic infrastructure and civic trust and all that. We want the civic trust to be bottom-up, clearly.
I believe in progress, and I believe in professional work. So I don't, and if we for a second just split the idealistic or the narrative of Europe of a dream and of a human project, but just see Europe as yet another political structure, not a state, but a kind of entity that tries to organize people's life in a certain space, in a certain time, which is what it is. The European Union as a political project has a mission in preventing that people kill each other, and by sharing common goods or by sharing a certain policy, improving a kind of market economy, and in a way raising the standard of living, or allowing a standard of living for all these people living in that political entity, in that space, that nobody needs to die. And this task, in a way, is given in a geopolitical context, which is a global context. And there is a task, I think, for Europe in that context, that Europe safeguards peace, it safeguards the well-being of people, and it tries to enlarge these two, in a way, aims that it has for its own project to, in a global context, to as many people around this world as possible. I think when we talk about this human dimension, then Europe has the task not to protect just inward-looking human values equals European values. No, then it has a set of values that Europe needs, and that's a huge responsibility, I think, that we as Europeans, with a political project that is allowing security to us, peace, and that is allowing survival to us, and that is allowing certain rights to us. So we are in a fantastic privilege with all its differences and things that we have to work on. Of course, there's no doubt about that. Now I acknowledge that we have freedom, and I acknowledge that it's not a self-evidence. Even that requires huge attention, that we have freedom, and we see this around Europe and very close by, that it's not an evidence. So it needs an attention in itself. But let's assume that this freedom is a given. That this freedom is something I have been growing up with. The next step, or the freedom that I enjoy, is only as much worth as it can be shared with as many people as possible. And that is justice. So freedom becomes justice, and justice is what should guide us.
It's easy to, when you're feeling that you're not being represented, that the system has failed you, that they're all the same, it's easy to feel depressed and just say, it's easy to say, well, they're all the same and I'm not going to go to vote. That's a very common stance in Slovenia, where there's a big mistrust into politicians, into the system, as it is at the moment. And sometimes I do face that question when I go to the ballot box, when I see an election in Slovenia, and I feel like, who the hell should I vote for? And you do easily fall into the trap, they're all the same. Countries say they want growth, but they're cutting culture, they're cutting education, they're cutting support to civil society organizations and to youth organizations, you're cutting what is actually the best investment in a future society. They are claiming that they want to have a knowledge-based society, but they are cutting the roots of that knowledge-based society. So that's what worries us a lot. So we need to get out of the paradigm of austerity, but also get out of the paradigm that just saving is going to be the best way to do it, and that saving on one thing is the only thing. In Greece, they didn't cut the military spending. They cut education and healthcare, so that people are now poorer than ever, but the military is still doing well. That just doesn't make any sense.
Eu acho que tanto os jovens como eu acho que as pessoas em geral, eu acho que há um sentimento de alguma letargia, letárgico relativamente aos assuntos europeus. E eu acho que isso tem a ver com uma certa impotência que as pessoas e talvez os jovens sintam. Eu sinto que a sua participação não é suficientemente valorizada, ou eles sentem que não é suficientemente valorizada, e de qualquer forma é tão ínfima que depois as pessoas acabam por achar que de facto não têm em alguma medida os destinos da Europa nas suas mãos. E eu acho que é esse sentimento que deve ser alterado. Aliás, eu acho que foi bem paradigmático esta questão da crise económica, em que eu senti que os países do Sul, as pessoas dos países do Sul, sentiram de alguma forma que a Europa os estava a abandonar. Aliás, é curioso porque uma das razões porque eu quis participar neste Comitê Cultural foi precisamente porque percebi que era muito difícil fazer entender aos meus colegas da Europa do Norte aquilo que países como Portugal estavam a passar naquela altura. E repare, há narrativas como a narrativa dos pigs, e nós podemos ser frontais relativamente a isso, que são narrativas reais e que foram criadas dentro da Europa. Aquilo que me parece é que o projeto europeu é um projeto com enorme potencialidade e eu sou, de facto, europeia e quero ser, mas não é um projeto sem mácula e por isso é que virar as costas ao projeto ou ser indiferente a esse projeto é mesmo a pior das soluções.
We share our taxes, and then there is a common ground and common solidarity in social security, education, and so on. But the system has to work, and that's important that the politician gives again ethical values to that the system works, that the trains comes in time, that there is a public transport, there is good working hospitals, and that's also a very fundamental element of solidarity, and that's important also in the way of the labor, and not only the capital, and that's many, and that were all values of Europe against the American way of life and other continents. So we have it all. Can we keep it? I hope so. And can we keep it in a long-term vision? Yes, I hope so. And that's the element of the technocracy of Brussels. The technocracy of Brussels can do a lot. There are fantastic people in Brussels. Fantastic administration, and so there's a negative perception. Brussels is always a fault, but it's a problem of the leaders who come with a most too egoistic perspective to Brussels. The problem is that it's not so difficult. A commissioner coming to Brussels and needs to take his job here, it will be very difficult because it's very complex in each of the departments. But he needs, in the first place, to have the passion and the vision. If he has passion, if the Juncker Commission, there is coming out, because it's the Erasmus generation, and the chief of staffs will be around the 40s, if these guys do understand that they have to communicate again with the young generation. Juncker is not one of these direct best symbols of that young generation, but if in the back office a young generation can take a power, and that certainly the cultural institutions as actors, like the Casa la Musica, all these large cultural institutions, that they do a bottom-up to give examples, and that will say that our institutions has to be again agoras of debate, but not only to tell, but also to act. Inside the university, inside the arts institutions, they have to act, each on its level. And that's, if with the project of the narrative, we can start again a movement as a stand-up for Europe, then we will have achieved something. And so it will be by the micro projects and not only by the macro project.
Well, there is something that we Europeans all want together. It's very difficult to see it when you live in Europe. It's very easy to see it if you live somewhere else. Anywhere. Even in America, you immediately feel, okay, so this is why I'm European, this is why we believe differently. So, let alone if you live in China, Russia, Africa, or somewhere else, you will immediately know what it is that we Europeans value, and that's quality of life, respect for one another, making things actually quite meticulously. There's a lot of respect, there's a protection of the weak, be it minority or economically speaking. There is a huge belief, maybe even overrated belief in democracy, with which I am quite happy, but the negative side of that is people feel that European Union is not democratic enough, while it's in fact the most democratic structure we've ever had in Europe, and also possibly maybe with the exception of a couple of other countries, but otherwise it's one of the most democratic regimes in the world. You know, there aren't really any regimes that we can say, okay, fine, let's just copy that. No, this is why it's so difficult. The current system is in the state in which it is not sustainable. Not only for ecological reasons, with which I understand. My argumentation here is a little bit, I would say, going even beyond that. I say, even if we had endless resources, as we do not, I'm not doubting, but let's just imagine that clean air is abundant, enough of petrol, enough of coal, or let's say that we tomorrow invent some magical way of energy source, whatever. Even then the system is not sustainable. Why? Basically, I would say the biggest reason why the system is unsustainable is because it was built as a ship, built under the assumptions that favorable winds will always blow, and that's not a good ship. Of course, when you want to build a ship, you want to make sure that that ship can harvest the wind with the best possible, and that it can really make use of every single puff. But to build a ship that sinks the moment it starts raining, or the sun stops shining, the wind stops blowing, that's not a good ship. A lot of people like to be European, but they have this problem with European Union. So there's again, we need to distinguish here slightly, because people like, I think, very much the idea of being European. And the things that we don't like, we sort of can make fun about, and da-da-da-da-da-da. We're not so lenient when it comes to the European Union as a structure that enables sort of this idea of Europe that is not fighting with each other.
The importance of our heritage, our history, about understanding, knowing about it, understanding it in the wider context is something that I very much hope that Europe and European Union will invest more attention in the future, in organizations like Europa Nostra and many other organizations active in that field on all levels, from the local level to the European level. I deeply believe that our culture, our cultural heritage is a huge resource that we have. Why I say resource? Because it is also source of inspiration. It is source of creativity. It is learning from the founding fathers. It is learning from so many generations before. It is getting inspiration for so many artists, scientists that have made Europe such a formidable place on the globe, and sort of continue to journey not just as a sort of fortress Europe, but rather as an open space, as Europeans, but cosmopolitan Europeans who are taking responsibility in the world of today, and in a way providing the necessary cultural leadership that the entire world today needs from Europe to take.